He took credit for my work for 3 years. When he got promoted, I dropped the file. Failures like you don't deserve to succeed. That was the message he sent me. Not in those exact words, but I read between the lines. The message came as a Teams notification while I was still seated in the conference room cleaning up the last few slides from the quarterly presentation I had built. He had just finished delivering it line for line in my voice using my data, my forecasts, my words. And now he was congratulating himself. My name is Eliza Nguyen. I'm 34 years old. At the time, I was a senior business analyst for a mid-sized logistics firm in Portland. I had been in that room every quarter for the past 5 years, building the decks, refining the models, coaching the managers on what to say. I was the invisible architect behind what they called the big wins. But I was never the one who delivered them. That role belonged to my manager, David Renshaw. Charming, articulate, a master of timing, of credit, of knowing exactly when to step in and when to act as if he had been part of the planning all along. He had a talent for repackaging other people's brilliance as his own, and a face that made you forget to question it. The first time it happened, I told myself it was just how things worked. Maybe I hadn't spoken up clearly enough in the meeting. Maybe I should have taken the mic when the client asked how we projected the savings margin. I was new, then grateful just to be there. But gratitude can be a leash if you wear it too long. I worked late most nights. David didn't. He had a wife, 3 kids, a dog that needed walking. I had a studio apartment and a desk light that flickered like it resented staying on past midnight. I didn't mind. Not at first. I loved the work. I was good at it. Numbers made sense to me in a way people didn't. David knew that. He leaned on it. At first it felt like mentorship. He brought me into meetings, let me shadow executive calls, looped me in on strategy sessions with the COO. I thought it meant something. I thought I was being groomed for growth. What I was really being groomed for was silence. Because every time I produced something worth noticing, David handled the presentation. When there were accolades, he accepted them on behalf of the team. When there was blame, he regretfully delegated. I wasn't naive. I saw it. But I was still hopeful. I thought if I just worked harder, stayed longer, proved myself irrefutably, they'd have to see me. The first real crack came during our end-of-year review. David had asked me to prepare a performance summary, bullet points of major contributions I had made over the past 12 months. I sent him a detailed document complete with screenshots, source files, and timelines. He thanked me, said it would help him advocate for me in the leadership pipeline conversation. A week later, during my actual review with HR, none of my examples were mentioned. Instead, David noted I was a quiet but consistent contributor, and that while I excelled at execution, I needed to build stronger leadership presence. I remember the exact phrasing. It was rehearsed. He had said it before, probably about someone else. I asked about the project where we had uncovered a $1.2 million cost leakage. The one where I'd spent 2 months rebuilding the forecasting model from scratch, unearthing inefficiencies the consultants had missed. David smiled. That was a team effort, he said. But it wasn't. It had been mine. That night I didn't go home. I sat in my car outside the office, engine off, staring at the building like it owed me an explanation. It never came. From that point on, something shifted. I still worked. I still delivered. But a small part of me began to detach. I started documenting, quietly. Not in anger, not yet. Just in awareness. I saved versions of files with metadata intact. I archived emails that confirmed authorship. I built a folder called Reference Materials on a cloud drive only I had access to. I didn't know what I was going to do with it. Maybe nothing. Maybe I was just protecting myself in case someone tried to blame me for something. That's what I told myself. But truthfully, I was already starting to see the pattern. David's pattern he climbed. Each promotion was built on the invisible labor of people like me. People who stayed late and spoke softly and thought integrity would be its own reward. I watched two others go before me. Sarah, who left after her ideas were pitched without her in the room. Kunal, who was laid off after David blamed him for a failed integration he had personally ignored warnings about. I stayed. I didn't have the luxury to walk. Rent was real. Healthcare was tethered to the job. And part of me still believed I could fix it, or at least outlast it. The final straw came 3 years in. David was promoted to VP of Strategy. He announced it during an all-hands meeting standing in front of the very slide deck I had built that morning. He didn't thank me. He didn't even glance in my direction. He said, "This team has been a reflection of my vision, and I'm proud of everything we've accomplished." I felt something cold settle in my chest. That night I opened the folder, the one with all the files, and for the first time I renamed it. I called it Renshaw Attribution Original Work, not because I was going to do anything, not yet, but because I had finally admitted what it really was. A record, a truth, a fuse. I didn't touch the folder again for weeks, not because I forgot about it, but because I was waiting to see if it would keep growing on its own, like mold or rust. I wasn't wrong. David's promotion shifted something in the air. Suddenly, he wasn't just taking credit, he was rewriting history. In meetings, he began referring to initiatives I had built as part of his long-term strategic plan. He used terms I had coined, insights I had phrased as if they had always come from him. And people believed it. Why wouldn't they? He was the VP now. He wore his suits better, spoke slower, smiled more often, especially when lying. I stopped correcting him. I stopped speaking much at all. I began listening instead, not just to him, to others, to whispers in hallways, to sighs in Zoom calls, to the tired voices of others who, like me, had started out hopeful and ended up hollowed. I kept working, efficient, invisible, precise. But privately I added to the file email threads where I outlined entire campaign pivots that were later pitched as his strategic redirection. Calendar invites showing I ran weekly performance huddles, the same ones he later claimed were his way of connecting to the front lines. Annotated PDFs of his own presentations marked with the timestamps of my original source data. I wasn't building a revenge file, I was building a truth file. Because I had come to a realization the only way someone like David gets away with it is if people like me pretend it doesn't matter. But it did. It mattered when I got passed over for a promotion because I hadn't shown leadership. It mattered when our COO cited David's intellectual ownership of a process I had engineered alone in a Starbucks over 2 months. It mattered every time I heard my own voice coming out of his mouth. And then something changed. Her name was Priya Anand, a senior associate from corporate HQ, someone they parachuted in after the company acquired a rival firm. She wasn't flashy. Just efficient, clear-eyed, the kind of woman who didn't smile unless there was a reason. She joined a strategic alignment call one Thursday and stayed quiet for most of it. But when David started walking through the synergy framework, she interrupted. "This looks familiar." "Is this based on the Tellison diagnostic model?" David blinked. I did not. He said it was inspired by best practices. She nodded slowly. Do you know who built the original projection model? David hesitated. I unmuted. I did. It was the first time I had spoken up in a meeting in weeks. My voice sounded strange to me, dry, unused, a door creaking open after years of staying shut. There was a pause. Priya tilted her head. I thought so, she said. The formatting matches your Jakarta project. She didn't say more. She didn't need to. After the call, she messaged me directly. You still have your original documentation? I didn't reply right away. Then yes. Her answer came within seconds. Keep it safe. From that moment on, I knew I wasn't crazy, and that changed everything. I started looking at David differently, not with resentment, with clarity. I stopped seeing him as this impossible obstacle, this immovable gatekeeper. He was just a man, charming, rehearsed, and frightened of being seen through. The more I watched, the more obvious it became he was terrified of being found out. It leaked in his over-explanations, his sudden interest in micromanaging language, his paranoia over who had access to the master decks. One afternoon, I walked into the war room to find him deleting slide histories before exporting PDFs. It wasn't about collaboration, it was about cover, and I knew then I didn't need to do anything dramatic, no big expose, no confrontation. I just needed to wait, because David was about to climb one rung too high, and the fall, when it came, wouldn't need my push, it would need my file, and I had it. Still growing, still quiet, still mine. The opportunity came 6 weeks later. Corporate announced a cross-division audit routine, they said. Just a realignment review after the merger. But everyone knew what it really was, a performance sweep before executive reshuffling. Titles would change. Budgets would shift. And someone inevitably would be demoted. David was nervous. He started calling more one-on-ones. Began preemptively crafting contribution maps. Asked me to prepare summaries of the last 12 quarters in his words, just in case they need a little context on where the real innovation came from. I told him I'd send it by Friday. Instead, I sent it to Priya. Not a summary, a record, with dates, names, files, no commentary, just the truth laid out plainly. A mirror with no distortion. She didn't respond in words. She didn't need to. Because by the following Tuesday I was quietly called into a room at HQ. No preamble, no fanfare, just a calm man in a navy suit and wire-frame glasses asking, "Can you walk me through this file?" I did, line by line. He listened, not with suspicion, with precision. He asked questions like a surgeon might probe a wound, not to accuse, but to understand where the rot had spread. At one point he stopped me. This model, this is what he pitched as the Renshaw Index, correct? I nodded. He tapped the desk once, quietly, almost like he was disappointed. He trademarked it last month. I said nothing, because there was nothing left to say. They thanked me, told me not to speak to anyone about the conversation until they completed their internal review. I agreed, then I walked outside into the cold air and stood there feeling nothing. Not triumph, not vindication, just stillness. Like the quiet after a long storm when the branches are still wet and the ground smells like something that's finally aired out. I went back to work the next day. David acted like everything was normal, gave me a tight smile, said he really appreciated the metrics I pulled. I nodded, replied with a polite, "Of course," because I didn't owe him anger anymore. I didn't owe him anything. He didn't know yet, but he would. It unraveled quickly after that. First came the reassignments, innocuous on the surface. David was looped out of the strategic planning committee. A project lead he favored was reassigned to another vertical. He started getting left off threads. Then came the questions. HR scheduled a clarification session regarding past campaigns. Legal asked for background on resource ownership. Priya visited our office again, this time with another executive. David smiled through it all, but his voice changed. He started stammering in meetings, misnaming files, repeating buzzwords like they were lifelines. The Polish began to wear off. One day I found him in the break room staring into his coffee. He turned to me, face pale. "They're going through my inbox." I met his eyes, not coldly, not cruelly, just evenly. "Then I hope it's all in order." That was all I said. Then I walked out, because I didn't need to watch it happen. I had already seen enough. The official announcement came in a company-wide email at 9:12 on a Thursday morning. After careful evaluation and realignment of strategic leadership, David Renshaw will be stepping down from his role as Vice President of Strategy, effective immediately. That was all it said. No thank you for his contributions. No curated farewell message. Just a line, sterile and sudden. I didn't celebrate. I didn't even smile. I closed the email and returned to my spreadsheet. There were margins to review, projections to clean, a meeting at 11 that no longer required David's input. Around noon, someone from facilities came to collect his badge and laptop. I watched them walk past his empty office. He hadn't shown up that day. He never came back. By Friday, a new org chart circulated. My name was listed under a newly created position, Director of Data Insights, reporting directly to the CFO. No fanfare, no HR interview, just a quiet promotion embedded in a PDF. Later that afternoon, Priya sent me a single message. "Do the work, don't become him." That was it. And I understood what she meant, because power, if you're not careful, becomes its own excuse. And silence, the one I had worn like armor for years, can turn into something corrosive if it's never broken. I accepted the promotion, but I didn't touch the folder again. Not because I was finished with it, because it had already done its job. The truth didn't need to be repeated, it just needed to be recorded. The weeks that followed were quieter. People stopped asking what happened. They speculated, of course, whispered in break rooms, swapped half-truths in Slack threads. But the company didn't explain, and I didn't offer answers. I became known as the quiet one who got things done. That was fine with me. Let them underestimate me. Again, let them think I rose by chance or loyalty or luck. They didn't need to know what it cost. Only I did. And I carried it carefully, not like a wound, but like a lesson. A scar with shape, one I could trace when the days felt too familiar. When someone else's voice started sounding too much like David's. When a younger analyst stumbled into my office, shoulders hunched, eyes hopeful, and I recognized the version of myself I had nearly buried. I never mentioned the folder to her, but I gave her credit. In every meeting, in every summary, in every place where I could have spoken over her, I chose instead to step back and let her own the silence, not as punishment, but as power. That's how it begins, that's how it ends. Quietly. Some people assumed I was proud of what happened. That it must have felt good to watch someone like David fall, to see him stripped of the illusion he built for years. Undone not by sabotage, but by the quiet return of truth. But pride isn't the right word. What I felt was release, not from him, from who I had become around him. For years I had bent myself smaller just to fit inside the version of success I was allowed. I had trained myself to be agreeable, to never interrupt, to nod at meetings where my ideas returned to me with someone else's name stitched on. And worst of all, I had convinced myself that silence was professionalism. It wasn't. It was fear dressed neatly. It was the echo chamber David needed to survive. The most dangerous thing about people like him isn't that they lie. It's that they teach you to lie to yourself, to believe you're lucky to even be in the room, to accept praise in his voice as your only reward. But once I stopped needing his approval, something strange happened. People started listening, not just to my reports, to me. My tone didn't change. I was still soft-spoken, still direct. But when I spoke now, I did it without waiting for someone to validate the thought before it finished leaving my lips. I met with the COO. I rewrote our data protocols. I cleaned the rot from our reporting system slowly, precisely. And when I saw the same pattern beginning to form in another department, the same subtle theft of authorship, the same dilution of female voices in strategic spaces, I didn't stay quiet. I didn't accuse. I documented. I offered facts. I stood in my own name. And when someone tried to cut in while a junior staff member was presenting, I said without raising my voice, "Let her finish. You'll have time to speak when she's done." The room went silent, not out of discomfort, out of recognition. Because that's all silence ever needed, someone willing to stand in it without flinching. And for the first time in years, I wasn't afraid of being seen. Months passed. David's name faded from the conversations. His office was reassigned, his contact removed from shared drives. A few newer employees didn't even know who he was. That was the strange thing about corporate spaces. Memory had an expiration date, and erasure was often polite. But I remembered, not with bitterness, with clarity. Sometimes I'd pass by the conference room where he used to rehearse speeches that weren't his. I'd glance at the chair where I used to sit, laptop open, lips sealed, watching someone else present a version of my work I barely recognized by the time it hit the screen. Now I sat at the head of the table, but I rarely took the floor. Instead, I asked questions, real ones, the kind that didn't come with a hidden agenda or a need to prove something. Because I had nothing left to prove, not to them, not to myself. The folder, the one labeled Renshaw Attribution Original Work, still existed. I never deleted it. But I never opened it again either. It had done its job. It wasn't a weapon, it was a witness. And witnesses, once heard, don't need to shout. One Friday, just before leaving for the weekend, I got a message from Priya. It was short. He applied to a role at a partner firm. I advised them to review internal integrity files. No other comment. I sat there rereading the line. And then I closed the chat, because it wasn't mine to finish. I wasn't chasing an ending. The ending had already happened. Quietly. Completely, without spectacle, just like it started. I think about him sometimes, not often, just in moments. Like when someone in a meeting clears their throat the way he used to before speaking. Or when a new analyst stares at their screen too long after someone else takes credit for their idea. Or when I catch myself hesitating just for a breath before claiming something I built. The past doesn't vanish when the people do. It lingers, in tone, in posture, in the way people lower their voices when the stakes get close to personal. And yet, we continue, we build, we stand, we name our work out loud. There's a woman on my team now, Alina. Sharp, thoughtful, a little too polite for her own good. Reminds me of myself before the quiet hardened. She brought me a report last week. It was good, meticulous, insightful. She walked me through it like she was apologizing for every slide. When she finished, she said, "You're free to change it if you think it's off base." I looked at her, calmly. No, I said. This is your work. Say that again when we meet with the board. She blinked, then nodded. It was a small thing, but that's how it starts. One voice held steady. One truth named without apology. One refusal to let silence steal what labor earned. And I've learned that's enough. Last winter, I found myself standing outside the old downtown office tower. I hadn't meant to. I was walking, thinking, and somehow my feet brought me there. The glass still reflected the sky the same way. The street lights blinked in the same rhythm. And for a moment I was 31 again, tired, overlooked, clinging to spreadsheets like they were lifelines. But only for a moment. Because I wasn't her anymore. Not because I'd been promoted, not because David was gone. But because I had stopped erasing myself to survive other people's ambition. I stood there in the cold, holding a coffee that had long since gone lukewarm, watching the window where our old conference room used to be. No one looked out. The blinds were closed. I thought of everything I never said in that room. All the times I stayed quiet. All the times I told myself next quarter, next time, and I let it go. Right there on the sidewalk with no audience, no performance, just air breath and silence, finally mine again. If this felt like your story too, leave a comment. You're not alone. We don't all get justice, but we can tell the truth, even if it's only to ourselves. And sometimes that's where healing begins. Right here. One sentence at a time, one voice unfolded, a full stop.